Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to begin scripting some developer products. Now, as always, if this video does help you guys out, make sure you smash the like button. And also, if you want to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that we make during this episode, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, let's hop right into it. Now, hopping directly into Roblox Studio, the first thing that we're going to do is actually spread around the sign model that we added to our game in the last episode. We're going to be using the sign model to display Surface GUIs around our game, which players can look at and click on some of the buttons inside of the Surface GUI to actually purchase the MonzterDEV products. Now, before we begin spreading the signs out, what I'm going to do is actually rename the model, and we're going to rename this to Clicks Sign. The reason for that is because I could definitely see in the future us having more signs in our game, especially when it comes to leaderboards or other things like that. So that's why I'd rather avoid just using such a basic word such as sign when it can be used by a ton of other things as well. Now that we've renamed that, what we're going to do is drag and drop this inside of the spawn folder, and then I'm going to duplicate that. What I'll then do is go inside the islands folder, and then we'll also decide to put one inside of the forest island. So I'm going to drag our duplicated click sign and put that inside of the forest folder. Now that it's inside of the forest folder, let's go ahead and actually drag this model all the way up to the forest island, and then we'll just kind of reposition it a little bit somewhere on here so that it fits. Okay, so I think that works. Now I do understand that this might not be the most appealing thing, but at the same time, when it comes to the series, it's mostly intended for teaching you how to script. I'm not a very creative person, and I'm certainly not a builder, so when it comes to models and everything like that, I'm not your go-to person. But anyway, now that we have 2 click signs in our game, that's good enough for me. If you want to, you can spread some more throughout your game as well, but I'm just going to go with 2, especially just to show you guys how we can easily display and manage the Surface GUIs on multiple different models rather than just having one sign. Now that we've done that, the next thing that I want to do is actually create the developer products themselves. There's a couple of different ways to do that. One of the ways that we can do this is by going to our game settings, going to the monetization tab, and if we look towards the bottom, or if you scroll towards the bottom, you should be able to see the developer products section right here along with the create button. When we click on that, we can actually see that a new developer product is added right below here. If we click that again, another one is added as well. Now we can see that there's 3 periods to the right of each of the developer products, which we can click on, then click on edit, and then we can actually edit and configure these developer products. Now that's cool and all, but of course, Roblox being Roblox, well, these developer products are missing so many different things that we can actually customize in a different way. For instance, you can't even specify the image of a developer product in here. You have to do that from the website. So rather than creating our developer products this way, we're going to go ahead and do that on the website. So I'm just going to go ahead and discard all those changes. You're then going to want to go to create.roblox.com, which should take you directly to the creator dashboard. If you're unfamiliar with this, I don't blame you. It's something kind of new that Roblox has been working on, and they haven't fully transitioned over to this yet. But once you're over here, you're going to want to find your game and then actually select that game. Now that we've selected our game, we're going to want to look towards the left-hand side of the screen, and we should see the associated items button right here, which we can click on. Once we click on this, it'll actually take us to a page which will first display our badges. Then we have a category for passes, and then we also have a category for developer products as well. So we'll also come here whenever we want to start creating our game passes, but for right now, we're going to work on developer products. So of course, currently we don't have any developer products created, so what we're going to do is click on create a developer product. Now on this page, it's kind of similar to what we saw in Roblox Studio, but this page actually allows us to specify an image as well as a description, which is super useful. So for the image, I'm just going to use our clicker button icon image. For the name, we're going to set that to clicks package number 1. I'm not going to set any description here. And then for the price on Robux, I'm just going to set that to 1. Now you might be wondering, why are we not specifying the amount of clicks that the player gets in the name of the developer product? The reason for that is because the amount of clicks that the player is going to get is actually going to be dynamic. So the amount of clicks that the player gets from each package is actually going to be based off of how many times the player has rebirthed in our game. And considering we're not actually able to update a developer product name for each specific player, we kind of have to set a generic name like clicks package number 1, and then we'll actually display the amount of clicks that the player gets in our game. So now that we filled out all the information for our first developer product, we're going to go ahead and click on create developer product, and that should create the first product. Perfect. And we can actually see the product right here, and this is the ID of the product as well. Now what I'm going to do is create 5 more of these exact same packages, but each time I'm going to increase the package number by 1 as well as the price. So for instance, with our second package, I'm going to call this clicks package number 2, and I'm going to set the price on Robux to 2. Okay, so now I've finished adding all of our developer products, and at the end of this, you should have a total of 6 different clicks packages. Now that we've done that, we can exit off this webpage and go back to Roblox Studio. So back inside of Roblox Studio, we can go back to the game settings, go back to monetization, and if we scroll down, we can now see all of the developer products that we just added. Now, as we can see, every single developer product actually has a product ID. If we click these 3 dots over here, it actually gives us an option to copy the ID to clipboard. Now, we're not going to be using these right this second, but what I'd recommend doing to save some time is copy every single product ID and paste them into a notepad, and make sure that you do that in the correct order. So clicks package number 1 first and clicks package number 6 last. The reason that I'm saying that is because we're going to be using these IDs later, and it's just so much quicker to go to an external program where you already have them all laid out in a single list, rather than every single time going to game settings, clicking on monetization, clicking copy to clipboard, going back to studio, pasting that where you need to, and then doing that for all 6 of the different products. Okay, cool. So I've now copied them all myself, and I'm going to paste them into the command bar just to show you guys what I did. So I basically just create a list of them separated by a comma. And like I said, we're not going to be using them right this second, but at least now that we have them in a list, we can easily use them later. All right, so to begin getting into the scripting side of things, what we're going to first do is create the shop config. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of our configs folder, and then we're going to add a brand new module script. Of course, we're going to rename this module script to shop, and then the module itself inside will also rename the shop. Now inside of this module script, we're going to create our first variable, which is going to be called products, and that's going to be equal to a table. Now inside of this table, for their keys, we're going to have different categories of all the different products that the player can purchase. So first we'll start off by creating the clicks category, and we're going to set that equal to a table as well. Now the clicks table is going to be an array of more tables. So I'm going to go ahead and create my first table inside of here. Now each of the tables inside of our clicks table is going to have 2 different properties. The first property is going to be called ID, which is going to be the ID of the developer product. And remember when I said to put all of those IDs in the list? Well, this is where that's going to come in handy. So you're going to want to copy and paste your first developer product ID right into here. Then we'll throw a comma after that, and we'll add the second property to this table. The second property is going to be called amount, and we're going to set that to 100. Now, what the amount property refers to is the base amount of clicks that the player is going to get when they purchase this developer product. Now, what I mean by base amount is that we're not going to just use this number specifically. We're also going to use a function when we calculate how many clicks the player should actually receive, because like I said earlier, we're going to take into account the amount of times the player has rebirthed. To just give you a further example, let's just say that the way that we're going to calculate our clicks is by multiplying the amount of rebirths a player has by the base amount right here. And of course, the reason that we're doing this is so that our developer product scales with the player as they progress through our game. A player who joins our game is not going to want to spend any Robux if they get such a small amount of currency when they could just play the game and get 10 times that amount because they've rebirthed so many times. Anyways, now that we've added this first table to the array, what we're going to do is add a comma after here, and then we can literally just copy and paste this. Now we'll replace the ID with our second ID, and then for the amount property, we can increase that number a little bit. So I'm going to set that to 500. Now I'm going to copy and paste this a couple of times, and then I'm going to set all these tables up for all 6 of the individual dev products. Okay, cool. We've now set up all the developer products. Each of these have a unique ID, and they also have an amount as well. Remember, since this is an array, the order does matter. So we want to start with the first developer product that we made and then finish with the last one. Cool. So now that we've added all those clicks developer products right there, what we're then going to do is start working on a function. Now this function is going to be called calculate clicks product, and it's going to accept an index, which is going to be a number, and data, which is going to be the player's data. And inside of this function, we're going to create a variable called product config, which is going to be equal to shop.products. Then we want to get the clicks products, and then we're going to index that with the specific index. Now that we have one of the products, we're going to create a new variable called amount, and we're going to set that equal to product config.amount. Next, what we'll do is take into account the amount of rebirths that the player has. So we're going to create a variable called rebirths, and that's going to be equal to data.rebirths. Now I'm going to keep these calculations relatively simple because this is just showing you how you could do this. You of course want to tailor these calculations to your own game to balance it out and everything else like that. But like I said, this is just showing you how you can actually do it. So what we're going to do is say amount times equals, and then the amount of rebirths that the player has. So let's say, for instance, the player is purchasing the first package. The amount is going to be 100 because, of course, the amount right here is 100. And then let's just say that the player has 10 rebirths. What amount would actually be set to here is 1,000. Of course, because 100 times 10 equals 1,000. Not only did that to help visualize exactly what we're doing here, but anyways, now that we've done our calculations, what we're then going to do is return the amount variable. Cool. Now we're done with that function, and we're going to create a new one. This function is going to be called get product type from ID, and it's going to accept a product ID, which is a number. Now the first thing that we're going to do is start off by looping through the products table right here. So our keys are going to be the product type, while the values are going to be the packages in shop.products. Then what we want to do is actually loop through all of the packages. So we're going to say for index, comma package, and packages do. Then what we want to do is we want to actually check if the package.id is equal to the product ID. Now if this is true, then what we're going to do is return the product type. Now this function is going to be useful when it comes to performing actions based off of a specific product type. So for instance, currently we've only added the click products to the game. In the future, we might add more products, but for each of the different type of products, we always are going to reward them in a different way. Now, if all we're given is a product ID, we can't really decide how we want to reward that specific product because all we have is an ID. The way that we can determine how we're going to handle rewarding that product is more so based off of what type the product actually is, such as clicks, for example. So you probably won't see the usage of this function towards the end of the video when we start scripting the server side of things. Anyways, we're then going to create another function. This function is going to be called getProductIndex from ID, and again, that's going to accept a product ID. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is actually create a variable for the type of this product. And well, I guess I was wrong when I said we weren't going to use this function till the end, but we're now actually going to use the function that we just created called getProductType from ID. And what are we going to do? We're going to pass through the product ID. Now that we have the product type, we actually know what table we need to loop through. So we're going to loop through the product category table, and for the key, it's going to be index while the value is going to be the package. And that's going to be in the shop.products, and then we're going to index that with the product type and then do. Cool. So now that we're looping through each of the individual packages inside of here, what we're then going to do is we're going to check if the ID of the package is equal to the product ID. And if it is, then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to return the index. Now, what are we going to be using this function for? Well, this function is most likely going to be used when we want to get the amount property of each of the specific packages from a specific click package. Now, since clicks is an array, not a dictionary, we can't simply just index clicks with the ID that we're looking for and then get all the information about it. Instead, we have to actually use this function because we have to loop through the table, then check the product IDs to see if it's the one we're looking for, and then we'll finally get the actual index that we're looking for. And then once we get the index, we can easily just index the table and then get the amount property that way. With that all being said, we're pretty much done with creating this configs file, and now we can move on to scripting the GUI. So what we're going to do is go inside of the starter player scripts, go into the GUI folder, and then we're going to actually add a brand new folder to this, and we're going to rename this to be called shop. Now that we've done that, I'm going to duplicate the achievements logo script, drag that inside of shop, and then I'm going to rename this one to shop. We can then open that script up. Now inside of here, we have the player service, the replicated storage. We also want to get another service, which is actually the marketplace service. So let's create a variable for that. We then have the player GUI, the remotes variable. We have the state manager, the format number, and the achievements config, which we don't actually need. Instead, we need the shop config. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that. In addition to that, we also have the buns GUI as well as the open bun. Let's go ahead and actually update the opens bun because we want to set that to the shop image bun. For the GUI, we want to update this as well and set that to the shop screen GUI. We then have the frame, and now we have a bunch of variables below here, which we can pretty much delete all of this. Okay, so the next variable that we're going to create is actually going to be called clicks frame, and that's inside of the frame, so frame.clicks. We then also have the clicks container, which is inside of the clicks frame, so clicks frame.container. We then also have the exit bun, so local exit equals frame.exit. We then want to create a type, which is called mode, and this is going to be equal to a couple of different strings, which can be used for the actual mode that the shop is currently in. For instance, if we're displaying the clicks packages, then we're going to be in the clicks mode. If we're displaying the game passes that can be purchased, then we're going to be in the passes mode. So we'll first start off with pets, we then have passes, then boosts, then clicks, and finally spins. Now that we've created that type, let's also create a variable called mode, and that's going to be of the mode type, and we're not actually going to set that to anything yet. Now we'll first start off by scripting actually opening the GUI. So we're going to create a brand new function called display GUI, which is not going to have any parameters. Inside of this function, all we're going to do is set the enable property of the GUI to not GUI.enabled. Now that we've done that, we can listen to when we click on the open button, and whenever we click on that, we're going to connect that to display GUI function. We can also script the exit button as well real quick. So whenever we click the exit button, what are we going to do? Well, we can also just call display GUI as well. Very simple and easy. Perfect. Next, what we're going to do is script all of the buttons on the left-hand side of the GUI that we can click on, which will update the mode that's currently displayed to the player. So above our display GUI function, we're going to create a brand new function. This again is going to have 0 parameters. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to loop through all of the buttons inside of that buttons frame. So we're going to say frame.buttons get children do. We then want to make sure that the button is an image button. And if it is an image button, then what do we want to do? Well, we're going to say button.mousebutton1click connect. We're going to connect that to an anonymous function. And now anytime we click any of these functions, we want to update the mode. Now, how are we going to update the mode? Well, we're actually going to create a function for doing that. So we're going to say local function set mode. This function is going to have a parameter, which is called mode, and that's going to be of the type mode. Now, the first thing that we want to do in this function is we want to check if the mode is equal to the current mode. So if the mode that we're trying to set is the current mode, then what we're going to actually do is just stop the function right here. Otherwise, we're then going to set the mode variable to the mode that we're changing to. Then after that, we can set the visibility of our clicks frame. So we're going to say clicks frame.visible equals mode equals clicks. So we only want the clicks frame to be visible if the mode that we're currently switching to is the clicks mode. And now that we've created this function, we can actually use it back down inside of the generate buttons function. So whenever we click on a button, we want to call the set mode function. And how do we get the mode that we actually want to set it to? Well, we use the name of the button just like that. Now, if this mode variable is underlined right here, it's just because we didn't set it equal to nil. It's because we didn't initialize it at all. That underline can be kind of looked at as like a visual warning rather than something bad is actually going to happen. So now that we've created the generate buttons function, we're going to go towards the bottom of our script, and then we're going to actually call the generate buttons function. Along with calling that function, we're also going to call the set mode function, and by default, we'll just set the mode to clicks. Now that we've done that, we can actually work on scripting displaying all of the click packages the player can purchase to them. So what we're going to do is above our set mode function, we're going to create a brand new function, which is going to be called generate click packages, and that's not going to have any parameters. Now inside of here, we're going to want to loop through all of the click packages. So for index, comma, package in shopconfig.products.clicks do. We're then going to want to create a variable called clone, which is going to be equal to clicks container.template, and then we're going to clone that template. We're then going to create another variable, which is going to be called product info. And what this is actually going to be set to is marketplace service. And then we're going to use a method of the service called get product info. And with this function, we need to provide the developer product ID. So we're going to say package.id. And then we also need to pass through an enum specifying the info that we're actually looking for. And since this is a developer product, we're going to say enum.info type. And now we can see all of our different choices. And of course, the choice that we're going to go with is product because we're looking for a developer product. Now that we've gotten that information, we can create some variables for specific information related to the product. The first variable we're going to create is called price. And this is the actual price in Robux. So we're going to say product info. And now the property that we're going to get from the product info table is price in Robux. Now Roblox Studio isn't smart enough to understand what get product info returns. And also get product info can return multiple different types of tables. So that's why we don't have any auto completion when we're typing price in Robux. In addition to getting the price, we also want to get the image as well. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to say product info.icon image asset ID. Yeah, that's a long property name, and make sure you spell everything correctly. You have all the capitalizations correct as well. Otherwise, you're going to run into some errors. So now that we've gotten the Robux price and the image of the developer product, the next thing we want to do is get the clicks amount for how many clicks that we're actually going to give to the player based on the amount of rebirths that they have. So we're going to use the shops config, and we're going to use that function that we created earlier called calculate clicks product. We're going to pass through the index as well as the state manager.getData. Okay, so now that we've gotten all that information, let's start updating our clone. We're going to say clone.visible equals true. We're also going to parent that clone, and where are we going to parent that to? Well, of course, the clicks container. We'll then name this clone, and the name is going to be set to the index. Inside of the clone, we have a price text label, and we're going to set the text of this equal to format number.format. Now, we usually use format compact, but here we're going to use format, and then we're going to pass through the clicks amount variable. Now, the reason that we're using format number.format here is because imagine if we had a number like 1,249. Using the format function, this is what the number would actually look like that we get back from it. So basically the full number displayed, but with commas put inside of it where they should be. Now, if we were to use format compact, this is what the number would look like. So 1.24K. Now, if I'm purchasing something for Robux in a game and they tell me that something costs 1.24K, then I click on the product and the price of it is actually different. Now, of course, it would only be 9 more Robux, but still, I'd be a little annoyed because it feels like they're misleading me as the price isn't the exact price it actually is. So that's why we're only using the format function here instead of format compact. Now, along with displaying the number, we're also going to display R and then a money symbol to tell the player, hey, this is the price in Robux. Then inside of the clone, we also have a frame called bottom, and inside of that frame, we have a text label called amount, and we want to set the text of this. Now, what are we going to set the text of this to? Well, first it's going to be a plus symbol, then we're going to say format number.format compact, and then we're going to pass through the clicks amount. And one of the last things that we have to do is update the icon image label. And what is this going to be set to? Well, you're probably thinking we're just going to set it to the image variable that we created up here, but we actually have to prefix the image variable with something. And what we have to prefix the image variable with is this string right here. So RBX asset ID : // and then we'll combine that string with the image string itself, and that'll get us our actual image. So because what the product info actually returns to us is just strictly the icon image asset ID and not this entire string right here, that's why we have to prefix the asset ID with this string right here so we can use it as an image. Now that we've done that, one of the last things that we want to do is listen for whenever this is clicked on. And whenever a player clicks on one of these packages, what we want to do is we're going to use the marketplace service, and we're going to use the prompt product purchase method. Man, that's a tongue twister. Try saying that 3 times in a row fast. It's not easy. Anyway, we're going to pass through the player that we want to prompt this purchase for, and then we're also going to pass through the ID of the developer product we want to prompt for the player to purchase. And that's actually all we have to do with this function. So what we're going to do is go back down to the bottom of our script, and right before we set the mode, we're going to call the generate click packages function. Now, considering the amount of clicks that a player will get from purchasing a package is dynamic and will change every time a player rebirths in our game, we need to also update the GUI to reflect that. So above our generate click packages function, we're going to create a brand new function, which is going to be called update click packages. Inside of here, we're once again going to loop through all the click packages. So in shopconfig.products.clicks do, we'll then create a variable called clone, which is going to be equal to clicks container, and then we're going to index that with the specific index of the product. And now that we've gotten that packages bun, what we're then going to do is get the brand new clicks amount. And how are we going to calculate that? Well, of course, we're going to use the calculate clicks product function. We'll pass to the index, as well as the player's data. And then we're going to update that amount text label of the bottom frame. And again, we're going to set that to format number, format compact, clicks amount, just like that. You could even just literally copy and paste it right there if you wanted to. That works as well. Now that we've created the update click packages function, we actually have to use it. And when are we going to use it? Well, remember, the amount of clicks that the player can get from each package is going to change every time they rebirth. So we're going to say remotes.update rebirths.onClient event connect anonymous function. We'll then say task.delay wait 0 seconds, and then we'll call the update click packages function just like that. Okay, cool. We're pretty much done with scripting the primary functionality of this, but something else that happens in the clicker simulator game is that anytime the player opens up the shop GUI, all of the other GUIs on the screen actually disappear. It's kind of similar to our egg hashing animation. Whenever a player hashes an egg in our game, all of the GUIs are hidden except for that GUI. So now, considering we already have that logic somewhere in our game, let's go ahead and get that logic and modularize it so that we can use it in multiple scripts. So we're going to go inside of our eggs local script and then look for the hide GUI function right here. What we're then going to do is go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the client folder, and we're going to add a brand new module script to this. We'll rename this to GUI utils. And then inside of here, we're just going to rename this to utils. Then what we can do is cut the hide GUI function from there, and then we can paste that directly inside of GUI utils. Now let's update this function. So of course, this should be named utils.hideGUI. We're going to need to get the lighting service, the player GUI. We'll also need a GUI blacklist variable as well. And honestly, the easiest place to get most of these variables from is the egg script itself. So we're just going to copy these variables, but all we actually need is 2 of them. We then want to get the player and the player GUI. And the last variable that we have left is actually the GUI blacklist. But instead of getting that variable from the egg script, we're actually just going to delete that variable entirely from it. Then going back to the GUI utils module, we're going to actually add a parameter to this function, which is called blacklist, and that's going to be a table, so that we can update this table.find usage right here, and this time we'll make it use the blacklist parameter. Then what we want to do is actually move the enable GUIs variable outside of this function, so we'll move it right above here. And then this task.delay statement right here, we can actually also remove that as well. We'll then rename this variable from hide GUI to hide GUIs, and then we'll create a new function called unhide GUIs. And we can paste that task.delay inside of here, because really what we want is just what's inside of that task.delay. So we can just delete the task.delay portion of it, and now we have this code right here. So when we call this function, it'll loop through all the previously enabled GUIs, re-enable them, and then it'll also disable the blur as well. Now we're pretty much done with this function, but the last thing that we want to actually do is when we call the hide GUIs function, we actually want to reset the enabled GUIs table back to a blank table. Cool. And now that we've done that, we can actually start using this function. So going back to the eggs local script, let's go ahead and require the GUI utils module script that we just created. So GUI utils, we'll rename this variable GUI utils, then go into the hatch animation where we call that hide GUI function. Instead, we're going to say GUI utils dot hide GUIs. We're going to pass through a table, and inside of this table, we're going to have a string called pet egg, which is the name of the GUI that we do not want to hide. And then after that, we're going to say task.delay. We're going to wait 3 seconds, and then we'll call the GUI utils dot unhide GUIs function. Awesome. So now that's all set up. We can exit out of the egg script, and then we can go back to the shop local script. Now inside of here, we're going to want to get that module as well. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that. GUI utils, and then we're going to want to go back down to the display GUI function. Inside of here, we're going to want to check if the GUI is enabled. And if it is enabled, then we want to call the GUI utils.unhide GUIs. But if it's not enabled, then we want to call GUI utils.hide GUIs, and we'll pass through a table with a string inside of it called shop, because we don't want to hide the shop GUI. We only want to hide all the other ones. And we're still going to set the enable property the exact same way, so that's perfect. Of course, I made a mistake. Going back to the generate click packages function inside of here, where we set the text of the price text label, we're using the clicks amount variable here, where we should actually be using the price variable. And now one of the last things that we want to do is go inside of the star GUIs, inside of the shop GUI, inside of the frame, inside of the clicks, inside of the container, and for this template, we want to set the visibility of it to false. And now that we've done that, we can go into our game and test this out. So hopping directly into our game, let's go ahead and click on the shop button. When we click on the shop button, we can see all of the other GUIs are actually hidden, and we can see the click packages displayed to us right here. We can see how much they cost in Robux and how much clicks we actually get for purchasing those packages. And now let's go ahead and click on one of those packages. When we click on one of those packages, we can see that we're actually given a prompt that we can purchase. So that's looking great. We can click on another package, and we can see that this time we're given package number 6. So this all seems like it's working perfectly. Now, if you do actually click the purchase button right here, you're account will not be charged because we're in Roblox Studio. But if you do click purchase, nothing will actually happen because we didn't script that on the server side. Cool, so now that we've scripted the screen GUI and we can see that that's all working, the next thing that we're going to do is script the Surface GUI to be displayed on all of our different signs. Now before we begin scripting that, let's go into the shop GUI, and this time we'll go inside of the click Surface GUI, inside of the frame, and for this template, we're going to set that to not visible as well. Cool, so now let's actually start scripting this. Going to the shop folder that we created that we have the shop script inside of, we're going to duplicate the shop script and we're going to rename this to signs. Now inside of here, we still need all those services, but we also need to get the workspace service as well. We still need the player GUI, the remotes variable, the state manager. We don't need the GUI utils, but we do need the format number and shop config. And we don't need any bun GUI. And for the GUI variable, this is still going to stay the same. We'll then create another variable called clicks GUI, which is going to be equal to GUI.clicks. Then we'll create a function called generate GUI. We'll first start off by looping through all the descendants in the workspace. So workspace get descendants, do, and also descendants should not be plural, so let's fix that. Now remember how we renamed that sign model earlier? Well, what we want to do is we want to check if the name of the descendant is equal to that name that we set of the model earlier. And the name that we set of that model earlier was click sign. And in addition to checking that the name is correct, we also want to check if the descendant is a model. So if it has this name and it is a model, then we know that that's the model that we're actually looking for. And now that we know that we found a model that we want to display the clicks on, what we can then do is start creating and generating the GUI. So we're going to create a variable called clone, which is going to be equal to clicks GUI, and then we're going to clone that. We'll then parent that to the screen GUI. We're then going to set the adorning property to the primary part of the descendant, which is a model. So now that we've created the GUI and then also set it to display somewhere, we now have to generate all the buttons for that specific GUI. And how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to loop through all the packages inside of the clicks category. So for index, package, in, shop config, .products, .clicks, do. We'll then create a variable called template, which is going to be equal to clone.frame.template, and then we're going to clone that. We'll then also create a variable called clicks amount, which of course is going to be equal to shop config.calculate clicks product. We'll pass through the index, as well as the state manager.getData. Now that we've got that information, let's then parent the template to the frame inside of the clone. We'll then also set the name of this equal to the index. We'll then make sure that it is visible. We'll then update the text of the amount text label equal to plus. Then we'll use format number, .format compact, and we'll pass through the clicks amount. And then we want to actually listen for this to be clicked on. And what do we want to do when this is clicked on? Well, of course, we're going to use the marketplace service, and we'll use that prompt product purchase method. We'll pass through the player as well as the package.id. Cool, and that's all that we have to do for that function. It's pretty similar to how we handle the screen GUI. Now that we've created that function though, let's go ahead and call the generate GUI function. And now that we've called it, we also have to create a function for updating the GUIs as well. So local function update GUIs. Then what we're going to do is loop through all the GUIs inside of the GUI. So GUI get children do. Now, if the GUI is a service GUI and the adorning property of it is set, then we know that it's not a template, so we can actually start working on it. And now that we know that we've got a service GUI that we want to update, what we then have to do is loop through all the packages from the click products and then update the amount text label. So we're going to do the exact same for loop. I'm just going to go ahead and actually copy and paste it right there. We'll then create a variable called clone, which is going to be equal to GUI.frame. And then inside of the frame, we're going to index that with the actual index. We're then going to want to get the clicks amount, so we'll just copy and paste that variable right there. And now that we've gotten the amount of clicks, we're then going to go inside of the clone. Inside of the clone, there is an amount text label, and we're going to set the text of that equal to plus, and then of course, once again, format number, .format compact, and then we'll pass through the clicks amount just like that. And now that we've created that function, when do we want to update them? Well, of course, we want to update them anytime the player rebursts. So .update reburst, .onClient event, connect, anonymous function, task.delay 0, and then we'll call the update GUIs function just like that. Cool, so now let's go into our game and test this out. Awesome, so once we get into our game, we can actually see that this sign right here has generated. So if we look at our shop's GUI, we can compare the amount of clicks that we get from each of the different packages to the one on this board right here, and they are all the exact same, so that's great. Now, if you're unable to actually click the buttons right here, that's most likely because we forgot to unset the adorning property of the first GUI that we created. So going inside of the start GUI, inside of shop, we have the click service GUI right here. We want to set the adorning property to nil. So clear that value, and then when you go into your game and test it out, you should be able to click on the buttons directly from the service GUI. So now the buttons have generated. Whenever we hover over them, we can see that those buttons are highlighted. If we click on one of them, we can see that we're prompted to purchase the product, and that's all working perfectly. Another thing that we could actually test out is when we rebirth. So let's go ahead and rebirth, and then we can see when we rebirth, all of those values are updated. And if we look at our screen GUI, GUI, we can see that all these values have also been updated as well. So that's working perfectly. Now, one of the last things that we actually have to do is set this up on the server side. So to do that, we're going to go inside of the server script service, and I'm going to duplicate the egg script right here, and then I'll rename the duplicated one to shop and open it up. Now, inside of here, we need all these services, and we also need an additional service, which is the marketplace service. So let's create a variable for that. We then have the remotes variable, but we just want to update this to be set to the remotes folder. Then we don't need the format number or the eggs config, or really any of these configs. The only config that we actually need is the shop config, so let's go ahead and create a variable for that. Along with the shop config, we need the player data manager, so let's go ahead and keep that. But everything else in the script, we can pretty much just go ahead and delete. So this is pretty much what your script should look like. Now, how do we know when a player purchases a developer product in our game? Well, the marketplace service actually has an event called process receipt, and we need to set that equal to a function, which is actually the callback function to this event. So we're going to create a function called purchase product. This is going to have one parameter called receipt info. Now that we've created that function, let's go ahead and use it down here. So we'll set that equal to the function just like that. Now the receipt info parameter is actually a table that has a couple of different properties inside of it. We're only going to be using two of the properties here. The first property is going to be the player's ID, so we'll create a variable called user ID, which is going to be equal to receipt info dot player ID. We'll then also create a variable called product ID, and that's going to be equal to receipt info dot product ID. Now that we've gotten that information, let's go ahead and actually get the player from their user ID. So we're going to say local player equals players get player by user ID, and then we'll pass through the user ID. Now, if we're not able to get that player, then we want to stop the function right there. After that, we want to go ahead and get the player's profile. And how are we going to do that? Well, inside of the player data, we have that profiles table, and we want to index that with the player. And if we're not able to find the profile, then we'll of course stop the function right there. After that, we're going to create a variable called product type, which we'll get by using the get product type from ID function that we created earlier, and we'll pass through the product ID to that. Now that we've gotten the product type, we're going to check if the product type equals clicks, and if it does equal clicks, then we know the specific action that we need to perform. Now you might be thinking, well, the only type that we actually have is clicks, and of course the reason that I'm creating this is because in the future we're going to add different types, so it's not always only going to be clicks here. Anyways, let's keep our functions organized, so we're going to create a function outside of here for actually rewarding the clicks to the player. So this function is going to be called reward clicks, which is going to take a player, which of course is a player. We'll then also take the player's profile and the product ID as well, which is a number. Then inside of here, we're going to want to actually get the index of the product, so shopconfig.get product index from ID. We'll then pass through the product ID. We'll then create a variable called clicks reward, which is going to be equal to shopconfig.calculate clicks product, and then we'll pass through the index as well as the profile.data. Now that we know how many clicks we want to reward the player with, we'll then actually reward them with that amount. So we'll say player data.adjust clicks, we'll pass through the player, and then we'll also pass through the clicks reward as well. Oh, and I set the player type incorrectly right here, so it should just be player, not a player's type. So now that we've actually rewarded the player with that amount of clicks, what we then need to do to tell Roblox that we have delivered this product is we actually have to return a specific enum. This enum is of the product purchase decision, and it's actually the purchase granted enum. So we'll return that right there, and then going back to this if statement inside of if product type equals clicks, what we'll then do is say return reward clicks, we'll pass through the player, we'll pass through the profile, and then we'll also pass through the product ID as well. So anytime a player purchases a developer product, this process receipt event is going to call this purchase product function. Now this function will periodically be repeatedly called until purchase granted has been returned to the function. So if you never return purchase granted, then the player is going to get a ton of rewards for free basically. Now I know we kind of just scratched the surface of the marketplace service, handling dev products and other things like that in this episode. The marketplace service has a lot of things that go into it. If any of this is confusing for you or you want to learn more about it, you can definitely look at the official documentation, which will fill you in with all the other information and really help you further understand this. Now, as it turns out, I actually made a mistake when we were trying to modularize the HiGUI's function. Inside of the eggs local script, which has the hatch animation function and actually contained the original HiGUI function that we took from this script, when we took the function from here and added to a module script and then came back to the script and used that function inside of here, I actually began to call the function in the wrong location. So we can see right here that I'm actually calling the HiGUI's function inside of our hatch animation function, when instead we actually need to call the HiGUI's function before we call the hatch animation function. So what I'm going to do is copy both of these lines right here and remove them from this function. Then what I'm going to do is look for where we call the hatch animation function, which is inside of our hatch function. So this is where we call the hatch animation function right over here. And now the reason that we can no longer call the HiGUI function inside of hatch animations is because when we hatch a pet, if we hatch multiple pets, we actually loop through all those pets and call the hatch animation function for each of those individual pets. So if we hatch more than a single pet, when we call the function the second time, there are no GUIs actually enabled. So when we call the HiGUI function and then unhide all the GUIs, we're basically overriding all of the previously enabled GUIs that we saved into a list because we replaced them with a blank empty table as no GUIs are actually enabled the second time around. So in order to fix this, all we have to do is throw those two two lines inside of our if pet statement and before we call the hatch animation function. So hiding the GUIs this way allows us to hatch multiple pets without any issues. With that being said though, this should all be set up perfectly and we should be able to test this out and have no issues at all. So let's go back into our game to test this out. Now, once we get into our game, we can see that we can click right here, and then let's just go ahead and purchase 1 million clicks. And we can see that this is working perfectly. So every time we purchase 1 million clicks, we can see that the amount of clicks we have is increased by 1 million. Let's then go ahead and rebirth. Now that we've rebirthed, we can see that we have 0 clicks. Let's go ahead and purchase another clicks package, and we can see that every single time we purchase that, we get more and more clicks. So that's working perfectly. We can rebirth again and see some of the numbers change, so that's cool. We can also purchase clicks through the screen GUI instead of only using the Surface GUI, and we can see that that works as well. So that's all working perfectly. Awesome. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that's going to be it for this episode. As usual, if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure you smash the like button. If you want to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this episode, there's a link down below the description to the Patreon, and you guys can go and check that out. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.